I've seen killers cry, scream, and swear on their mothers' graves. But the ones who try to act normal, they're the ones who keep me up at night. The call came in at 6:12 a.m. A woman, 42 years old, found her husband dead in their kitchen in Omaha, Nebraska. Said she came downstairs to make breakfast and found him on the floor, blood pooled under his head. I arrived 20 minutes later. The scene looked textbook. Victim slumped forward on the tiled floor, back of the skull fractured, coffee mug shattered beside him. Wife in tears. No signs of forced entry. She told me he slipped, said he was always clumsy. But that didn't explain the direction of the blood spatter, or the temperature of the coffee in the mug, or the fact that the broken ceramic was scattered like someone had dropped it after the impact, not before. See, most people don't know this, but spilled coffee, depending on how fresh it is, leaves a different kind of residue. If it sits too long, the foam collapses, oils separate, and it forms this faint skin over the surface. This mug still had heat, still had foam, and the milk hadn't even settled, which meant he hadn't been on the floor long. But here's what really did it for me. The mug was positioned perfectly on its side, lip pointing away from the victim. No drip trail, no splash radius. Someone placed it there carefully. A fall doesn't do careful. When I look back at the wife, I notice her trembling, but not crying anymore. She was watching me, not her husband. That's when I knew she wasn't grieving. She was gauging. I ordered the body to be transported and asked if she'd be willing to come down to the station later to talk. She agreed a little too quickly. Hours later, I sat across from her in interview room 2. I asked her to walk me through the morning again. And again, third time around, her story slipped. Said he always left the cabinet open, but earlier claimed she never saw him that morning. Small cracks, but that's where the truth leaks out. I pulled out a photo of the mug, asked if it was his. She nodded, then said something strange. He always drank it black, no sugar, but we found milk and cinnamon in the residue. Now I had her. She wasn't describing his coffee. She was describing hers. He didn't make that cup. She did. So I leaned in and asked, "Why did you hand him your mug?" She flinched, didn't answer, just looked at the photo like it was about to scream. The forensic report came back 2 hours later. The back of the skull had an indentation matching the edge of the marble countertop. He was pushed hard. The injury didn't match a slip. It matched a calculated shove. I went back to the kitchen, retraced the steps, remeasured the splatter. That's when I noticed something new. A second set of footprints, faint but visible in the light layer of spilled coffee. She'd stepped around him after he fell. Stepped around, not rushed to him. No panic, no shock, just positioning. We brought her in again the next morning. This time, I placed a mug in front of her. Clean, but unmistakable. You know what's strange? I asked. The foam in the coffee told me when he died, but the fingerprints told me who was still holding the mug. Her fingers twitched, her mouth opened, and then, just for a moment, she looked relieved, like the lie had been too heavy. She said, "He told me he was leaving me." For her. I made the coffee anyway. It wasn't rage. It wasn't heat of the moment. It was routine. She'd made him breakfast every morning for 17 years. On the last morning, she did it one more time, but with a final touch. Not poison, not a weapon, just leverage. A push, one step back, 1 second of silence, and the sound of bone hitting marble. She didn't scream, didn't call for help. She just placed the mug down and waited. Let the coffee cool while he did. Some confessions come from guilt, others from exhaustion. This one came from precision. You develop habits when you've seen too many crime scenes. I used to count the number of door locks the second I walked into a house. Not for safety, just instinct. If a front door had only one flimsy latch, it told me a lot about the kind of person who lived there. Naive, careless, or maybe confident, like they had Nothing worth stealing. But this case? This case started because the door wasn't locked. And it didn't make sense. I got the call on a cold Tuesday morning. Suburb of Asheville, North Carolina. Nice neighborhood. Fresh lawns. Christmas wreaths still up in February. The homeowner, a 34-year-old schoolteacher named Leah Morgan, had been found dead in her living room by her sister. No signs of forced entry. No struggle. No weapon. But something was wrong. She was sitting on her couch, legs tucked underneath her, remote in hand, and eyes wide open like she'd seen something right before she died. No bruises, no blood, no scratches. Paramedics couldn't find a cause of death. They assumed it was cardiac arrest. But Leah had no history of heart issues. And the strangest part? The front door was slightly ajar. Not broken, just open, the lock untouched. When I stepped inside, I felt it immediately. That static in the air when something doesn't fit. It wasn't just the body placement or the expression. It was a room itself. Nothing was missing. Nothing disturbed. Except one thing. A single wine glass on the coffee table. Lipstick print on the rim. A faint smudge, like someone had picked it up, and then hesitated. I asked her sister, Rachel, about the door. She said Leah always kept it locked. Always. Even when taking the trash out, she'd lock it behind her, which means two possibilities. Someone she trusted walked in, or she opened it willingly. But if that's the case, why would she leave it open? I looked into Leah's phone. She had texted a man named Daniel Owens the night before. They had gone on a few dates. The last message from her said, "Come by around 8. Doors unlocked." That was it. No reply from him. He never showed up, he claimed. Said he forgot. Had fallen asleep watching a game. His phone location backed it up. But that message? It felt off. Leah wasn't the type to leave a door unlocked for anyone. Not even for me. And I'd known her through multiple consultations in past cases. I ordered a tox screen. The results came back. Clean. No drugs. No alcohol. But traces of a rare compound called aconitine. A nerve toxin. Difficult to detect. Nearly tasteless. It causes cardiac arrest, often mistaken for natural death. You'd only know it was there if you were looking for it. Now here's the kicker. Aconitine doesn't show up in households by accident. It's extracted from a plant called monkshood, highly restricted, almost impossible to get unless you know what you're doing. The coffee table had no bottles, no food, but that wine glass, she'd only taken a sip, maybe two, so whoever brought it didn't stay long. And they didn't force her to drink it. She sipped it willingly. I brought Daniel back in. He looked nervous, but not panicked. I slid the tox report across the table. He stared at it like he couldn't read English. "You ever heard of monkshood?" I asked. He blinked. "Is that a band?" "Cute." I pressed further. Turns out Daniel's ex-girlfriend was a biochemist at a research lab, specialized in botanical toxins. Name? Christine Adler. I found that interesting. Even more interesting, Christine's car was parked 2 blocks from Leah's house the night Leah died. A neighbor's doorbell cam picked it up at 8:07 p.m., the same time Leah texted Daniel. But Christine had an alibi. She was working late. Lab, swipe-in records confirmed it. I requested the security footage. That's when the story cracked open. Christine had swiped in at 7:43 p.m., but the footage showed something odd. The person entering was shorter than Christine. Wore a hood, head down, no face, just a body entering on her badge. It was Rachel, Leah's sister. She'd once studied chemistry herself. Dropped out in her final year. Apparently, she and Leah had been fighting over an inheritance left by their mother. Leah had control over it. Rachel was broke, desperate, but smart enough to use Christine's identity to access the lab. Smart enough to poison a wine glass and convince Leah. She was coming over for a heart-to-heart. I confronted her with everything. She didn't deny it. She just stared at me and said she always left the door locked, except when she wanted to believe something good could happen. That line stuck with me. Leah believed her sister was there to reconcile. That's why the door was open. That's why she took the glass. That's why she died. Trust is a powerful thing. but it's also a weapon. What would you have done if the door wasn't locked? They call me out for a car crash. Not exactly my kind of case, but something about the way the officer phrased it on the phone made me grab my coat anyway. He said, "It doesn't add up. The scene feels wrong." That's all it took. The crash happened at the base of a sharp turn on Highway 56, just outside Rockford, Illinois. A blue Subaru had slammed into a tree, totaled. The driver, 29-year-old Patrick Lyles, was dead on impact. No passengers. It was pouring rain that night, so the working theory was hydroplaning. Speed and slick asphalt. End of story. Except the windshield wipers were turned off, and that didn't make sense. See, when someone crashes in a storm, the wipers are usually on, even instinctively. It's a muscle memory kind of thing. If you're scared, panicking, trying to regain control, you don't reach to turn off the wipers. If anything, they stay on, frantically sweeping through chaos. But this car's wipers were perfectly still when they found it. That was the first red flag. Second, Patrick's seatbelt was buckled, but the shoulder strap was oddly positioned, laying across his ribs, not over his chest, like it had been clipped in after the fact. A common trick when someone wants to stage an accident. I leaned in closer, checked the brake pedal. Dusty, untouched, no skid marks on the road either. For a guy who lost control, he sure didn't seem like he ever tried to stop. I pulled his phone records. No calls, no messages during the time of the crash. But something stood out, a 17-minute gap in his GPS history. The data jumped from a location 2 miles south to the crash site, with no record of movement in between. That's rare, unless someone disables location tracking manually. I started with his girlfriend, Erin. She was cooperative, devastated. Told me Patrick had been acting weird the past few weeks. Paranoid, distracted. Said he kept talking about someone following him. Some guy from work named Jack Whitmore. A name I didn't recognize, but one that popped up fast in Patrick's email. Turns out they both worked at a small logistics firm. Jared had recently been put on probation for falsifying delivery records. Patrick found out and, according to one email, had no choice but to report it. He was supposed to hand over evidence to the company's HR department 2 days before the crash. He never made it. I paid Jared a visit. He lived alone, quiet street, nothing suspicious at first glance. But as we talked, I noticed his truck, parked in the driveway, still had dried mud on the tires. Same red clay I'd seen at the top of the ridge near the crash site. That area wasn't part of the road. It was an access trail, closed to the public. I asked if he'd been out driving the night of the storm. He said no. I asked again. He said yes. I asked where. He said he couldn't remember. That was enough. A search warrant turned up a pair of latex gloves in the garage. One had a smear of automotive oil on the palm. Under UV, we found something else. A single drop of blood, not enough for a match, but enough to raise questions. We found out later it matched Patrick. Here's what we think happened. Jared intercepted Patrick that night, probably on his way to HR. He knew the storm would give him cover. He forced him off the main road and onto that access trail. At some point, he struck Patrick. Blunt force trauma behind the ear confirmed that much, and staged the crash to look like an accident. He buckled him in, killed the wipers, and rolled the car down the embankment. But here's the thing that sealed the case: the windshield itself. On impact, a driver's natural reflex is to raise their hands. Instinctive defense. Most crash victims leave handprints, smeared, bloody, or at least oily, on the glass. Patrick's windshield was pristine. No handprints. No signs of struggle. No impact bracing at all. He didn't see it coming. We reconstructed the timeline. Jared knew Patrick was a creature of habit. Same route every day, same playlist, same stop for gas. He waited near the access trail, headlights off, rain pouring. He planned the whole thing down to the minute. It wasn't just murder. It was choreography. And that's when it hit me. That's why the windshield wipers were off. Jared turned them off before staging the scene. But in doing so, he left a forensic breadcrumb only someone like me would ever follow. The windshield wiper theory. If something doesn't match instinct, it's not real. And that's how we caught a killer. You learn quickly in this line of work. The quieter the crime scene, the louder the lie behind it. Greg Holloway was found dead in his home office just after sunrise. 46 years old, healthy, no known enemies. He was slumped over his desk like he'd fallen asleep mid-sentence. His eyes were closed. Peaceful, too peaceful, and his coffee mug was still warm. His wife, Angela, was the one who called it in. She said she'd gone to bed early the night before and found him like that in the morning. No screaming, no panic, just a cold whisper into the phone. "I think my husband's dead." By the time I got there, the forensics team was already finishing up their initial sweep. I stepped into that office and instantly felt something was off, not because of what I saw, but because of what I felt. The temperature. It was freezing inside, in the middle of a Phoenix summer, with the sun already baking the sidewalks. The inside of that house was a meat locker. Thermostat read 52 degrees Fahrenheit. That's not cold for comfort. That's cold with intent. Angela told me they liked it chilly, said it helped them sleep. But Greg was found at his desk, not in bed. And the thermostat history showed the temp was manually dropped at exactly 12:14 a.m. Angela claimed she went to bed around midnight. It doesn't take a profiler to smell the first crack in her timeline. No signs of forced entry. No visible trauma on Greg's body. But behind his right ear, just under the hairline, there was a small red dot, barely noticeable, unless you were trained to look. The medical examiner flagged it. Preliminary toxicology didn't show anything obvious, but I had a gut feeling. I pushed for an expanded panel. Meanwhile, I had tech pull the smart thermostat logs. It told a story Angela didn't. The house had been running at a normal 72 degrees Fahrenheit all week. Only at 12:14 a.m. the previous night did someone drop it to refrigerator levels. Whoever did it wasn't just trying to stay cool, they were trying to slow down something. Or someone. Cold environments delay decomposition, slow lividity, confused time of death estimates. I've seen it before, usually with professionals. This didn't feel like a first-timer, but also didn't feel perfect. I took a closer look at Greg's desk. Papers neatly stacked, laptop open, and that coffee mug still warm at 7:12 a.m. That detail bothered me, because if Greg had died around 2 a.m., as the meat would later confirm, there was no reason for his coffee to still be warm 5 hours later, unless someone reheated it to stage the scene. I had the mug dusted for prints. Nothing. Wiped clean. Angela said she never touched it. But fingerprints don't lie. I kept digging. Greg had filed for divorce 3 weeks earlier. Big house. No prenup. A new will and signed. Motive? Financial devastation. Opportunity? She was home. Method? That red behind the ear came back. Trace of succinylcholine. A fast-acting paralytic. Nearly impossible to trace. Unless you knew where to look and tested fast. Angela's brother had been a nurse. Died 2 years ago in what was ruled an accidental overdose. But his toxicology showed the same compound, succinylcholine, a neat little circle. The staging was too neat. The scene too cold. The wife too calm. Every piece was performance designed to mislead. But like most performers, she over-rehearsed the part. She forgot that real grief is messy, uncontrolled. I confronted her with the evidence. She didn't speak, just asked for a lawyer. That's when I knew I had her. In this job, I've learned something simple. People kill for love, for hate, for jealousy. But the most calculated ones, they kill for comfort, for control. Angela didn't scream. She didn't run. She didn't panic. She adjusted the thermostat and waited. She wasn't just cooling the house. She was chilling the evidence. But no matter how cold a room gets, the truth sweats through. Even in silence, even when the body looks like it's just sleeping, there's always something out of place. And in this case, murder came wrapped in a robe, holding a hot cup of tea, standing in a room colder than the grave she thought she got away with. I've seen a lot of tragedies in my years on the force, but some of them stick with you long after the scene's been processed and the case closed. This one, though, was different. It wasn't just a mystery, the evidence or the lack of it. It was the sheer finality of it, the feeling that something was wrong in the most subtle of ways, something the victim didn't see coming. But we should have. It was a birthday. At least, it was supposed to be. A woman named Amanda Williams, 32 years old, was found dead in her apartment the day after her birthday. The night before, she'd celebrated at a bar with friends. Everyone had a good time. Amanda had been laughing, taking pictures, maybe a little tipsy. Her friends thought she was going to head home around midnight. Nothing unusual. But when they texted her the next morning to wish her a happy birthday, there was no response. Not unusual either. Amanda was one to sleep in after a long night out. But then her friends started calling, texting, leaving voicemails. Hours passed. By noon, when no one had heard from her, they were worried. The police were called. I was the one who responded to the call. I arrived at her apartment around 2 p.m. When I stepped into her place, everything seemed normal. Nothing out of place. No sign of struggle. No broken windows. No forced entry. Everything pristine. Too pristine. The kitchen counter had a birthday cake, still intact, candles unlit. The apartment was quiet, but not in the way you would expect after a night of celebration. The silence was off, a kind of emptiness that told me something was wrong. The bedroom door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open slowly, and there she was. Amanda was lying in bed, eyes closed, her expression tranquil, as though she were merely sleeping. But there was something unsettling about her stillness. Her skin was pale, almost ashen, her lips slightly blue. The first thing I noticed was the absence of any obvious signs of trauma. I called in the medical examiner. The preliminary assessment didn't give us much. No cuts, bruises, or any indication of physical injury. No signs of a heart attack or stroke either. A blood sample was taken immediately. It was too soon to tell, but my gut told me something wasn't adding up. I asked the officers to take a look at her phone. It was on the bedside table, face up, untouched. The last texts she received were from her friends congratulating her on her birthday. There was nothing strange about the messages themselves, but there was one odd detail that caught my attention. She had texted back a few minutes before going to bed the night before. "I'll see you all soon. I'm ready to make a fresh start." The word seemed too heavy for a birthday message, too final. Almost like she knew something was coming. Amanda's friends were interviewed next. They had been with her at the bar, and everyone remembered her being in high spirits. No sign of any trouble. No sign of any tension. But when we spoke to one of her closest friends, Lauren, her words struck me. She said Amanda had been planning a major life change. She had been seeing a new therapist and had recently mentioned getting rid of some old things that had been holding her back. She said Amanda had been working through her past. At the time, I didn't think much of it. Everyone goes through phases. But looking back, I realized how those words started to form a picture of someone preparing to let go of something, perhaps even of her life. Was Amanda planning to take control of the situation herself? Was this a self-inflicted death? Or was there something else at play? The next step was the toxicology report. The results came back the next day, and they were surprising. There was a trace of barbiturates in her system. A lot of it. Enough to have caused an overdose. But not a lethal one. She had the medication in her system. But it wasn't what killed her. I went back to her apartment, retracing her steps. The medical examiner's office had confirmed that Amanda had been dead for about 12 hours before the body was discovered. But there was one thing I didn't understand. How had she been able to stay so composed? She looked too calm, too peaceful. It didn't make sense. People who overdose don't look like that. I called in a specialist to look at the scene again. We both focused on the cake, the untouched birthday cake on the counter, the candles unlit. Something about it felt wrong, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just a birthday celebration gone awry. I had the cake examined by forensics. The results were unexpected. It had been laced with barbiturates, identical to the ones in her system. But the strange part? The dose was not a fatal one. It was just enough to make her fall asleep, but no more. Her friends confirmed that Amanda had been looking forward to her birthday all year, but no one ever mentioned the cake. They all remember it sitting there untouched, waiting for her to blow out the candles, but not one person had ever seen her eat it. I pieced it together slowly. Amanda had tried to end her life, but something went wrong. She had taken the pills, maybe even hoping to fade away, but she hadn't died. She had slept through the night peacefully, and in the morning, when she didn't wake up, she stayed in bed, still, calm, unaware of the tragedy unfolding. The barbiturates in the cake were a safety net, maybe even a last attempt at control, but they didn't work. And by the time she'd realized that she wasn't asleep forever, it was too late. She was already gone. There was no foul play. No one had killed her. But that was the thing about this case. It wasn't about who did it. It was about what wasn't done. The birthday that never happened. The quiet tragedy of someone who had everything ahead of them, only to fall into the quiet abyss of their own mind.